was my first day at Southern Lehigh High School in Pennsylvania, and I was walking into my junior year knowing absolutely no one. Everyone already had their friend groups, and I felt completely out of place. Lunchtime? That was the worst part. Juniors weren't allowed to leave for lunch, only seniors got that privilege. So I had to eat in the cafeteria, alone. I was dreading it, not wanting to sit at a random table and be that awkward kid. When lunchtime came, I walked into the cafeteria with my tray, hoping for a miracle. Every table was full, but then, in the far corner, I spotted a table with just 2 kids. It seemed like the least intimidating place to sit, so I walked over and asked, "Mind if I join?" They looked at each other, then one said, "Yeah." I noticed upon sitting down that the 2 were identical twins. They looked like they were partially of Hispanic heritage, but they didn't have accents. They honestly seemed all right. They introduced themselves as Antonio and Bruno, and they started a conversation with me. They invited me to hang out with them after school. Honestly, I figured, why not? I had to start somewhere as far as making friends. I got their numbers, and after school, I went home to drop off all my stuff. Shortly after, I got a text from Bruno telling me he and his brother were planning on hanging out. He told me to meet them around 9 that night at the nearby cemetery, which was like a 10-minute walk from my house. He said there was a cool hangout spot near there, plus the first day of school was on a Friday, so we had off the next day. I had nothing to do, so I said, "Yeah, I'm down." When the time came, Bruno texted me one more time, asking if I was still coming. I said, "Yeah, I'm gonna leave in a few," and confirmed we were meeting on the road by the cemetery. He said, "Yeah." So I began my walk in the dark to the cemetery. The longer I walked, the more I thought about my home move and being the new kid in high school. I was thinking about the fact that I was literally walking to a cemetery at night to hang out with 2 kids I had just met. But anyway, I got to the little road next to the cemetery and asked Bruno where they were. He started typing right away and said they were in the woods hanging by a small lake that they wanted to show me. Then he promptly sent his location. So I made my way into the woods, pushing branches out of my way, using my tiny phone flashlight as my only light. I started calling for Bruno and Antonio, as I felt like I was close enough according to the location he sent me, at least. Suddenly, I heard footsteps, so I stopped. Definitely footsteps approaching me. They were very low and slow. They called out that they better not be trying to scare me. Well, they weren't answering me though. I decided this was stupid, so I turned and started walking back toward the road. Those footsteps I mentioned earlier turned from quiet and slow to fast, and before I could even react, someone had their nails digging into my neck, effectively choking me. I heard a familiar voice screaming, "Grab him! Grab him!" I managed to break free from the chokehold and sprinted toward the road. I know they followed me until the tree line by the road. I was faster than them, and I could run for miles, and that's what I did. I ran straight home and told my parents. They considered calling the cops, but I thought it would be better to get pictures of the nail marks on my neck and report it to the school the next day. That's what we did, and with the help of the text that I got from Bruno, I was able to get the 2 students expelled. My parents made me block both their numbers. I didn't exactly argue with that though. My parents wanted me to confirm that these kids didn't know where we lived, and I told them simply, "Not as far as I know." So anyway, one night about a week later, I woke up to my room feeling really cold. I heard the sound of wind blowing into my room, and I looked at the window to see it was slid completely open. I wondered if my mom came in to open it, but that would make absolutely no sense. It was like 50 degrees out that night. I walked over to it and looked down below. A few feet below my bedroom window, there's a part of the exterior of my house that comes outward, creating a sort of ledge underneath my window that my father always told me to jump onto in case of a fire. I shut my window and walked over to my parents' bedroom. I gently knocked and opened the door, and my mom groggily asked what I had to ask her if she opened my window. She sat up saying, "No, why?" I told her louder, more concerned now, that my window was opened all the way by somebody. She started shaking my dad to wake him up and go check my room with me. But when he woke up, he told me to grow up and go back to sleep. I left my parents' door open as I walked back down the hall to my room, and I picked up on something that I'm surprised I picked up on. My door seemed to be half shut now, as opposed to completely open when I left. I pushed the door open just a little bit so I could get a look through the crack and see if, someone was behind the door. Even though I had the thought of the possibility, I never could have actually expected to see it. There was someone hiding behind my door. I screamed for my dad like a little girl. I screamed so loud, I'm sure it could be heard 3 doors down, and my door suddenly slammed shut just as my dad came rushing out of his room over to me. I screamed, "There's people in my room!" So he barged into the room and turned the light on. At that moment, we saw the leg of a person jumping out my window. My dad ran to the window, then downstairs and out the front door to attempt to chase them down. But he came back a few minutes later, out of breath, saying he didn't see anyone. Full of energy and fear, I swore it had to be those twins that I got expelled. My dad called the police, and I had to talk to them when they arrived, explaining the whole story back to the incident in the woods. My father backed up my story, but without proof of who entered, they said there wasn't anything they could do. They merely ordered us to lock the doors and consider installing cameras outside. As positive as I am that it was either one or both of those twins in my room, after getting through a solid couple of months of sleeping in fear, nothing of this nature ever happened again. Looking back now, I don't know why I was so willing to meet these kids in the woods at night. I should have realized in the cafeteria that day that they looked like trouble, and I should have stayed away. Freshman year of high school, 2007. Gym class, last period. We had a substitute gym teacher for one of the stormiest days of the year. He was an older man, not a senior citizen, but gray, maybe 55 to 60. He took attendance. When he passed me, he did a double take at me, which I found a bit uncomfortable. Not to float my own boat, but I always understood I looked older and really good for a freshman in high school. The sub told us to get into our volleyball teams, and he disappeared into the hall by the locker rooms for a while. 40 minutes went by, and the period was over. It was time for us to get changed and go home. I got into the locker room, and for some reason, my locker wasn't opening. I tried my usual combination over and over, but it wouldn't click open. I had to go to the sub and let him know to ask for my combination again. I figured maybe the combo just slipped from my mind for some reason. The sub told me to give him a few minutes, and he'd get the list of locker combos. I waited outside the office, and out he finally came with a book in his hands, open to a specific page. He walked into the girls' locker room with me, which I didn't expect him to do. The locker room was basically empty now, with one girl finishing up, changing. He walked over to my locker and tried the combination written down on the paper. It didn't work, no matter how many times he tried it. Each time he tried it and failed, he would look at me and laugh. I would force myself to laugh along to be polite when it started getting weird. He put his hand on my shoulder as he said, "We'll figure this out." He tried the combination again, with his hand still on my shoulder, and it didn't work again. I felt his hand slowly start inching down from my shoulder to my lower back. I pushed myself away and grabbed my bag, saying, "It's okay, I'm late for my bus." He tried the combination in the locker one more time, and it opened. He smiled and walked away. I waited until I heard the locker room door shut and proceeded to get changed quickly, when suddenly the room went dark. I finished pulling up my pants and shoved my locker in the dark. I threw on my backpack and started walking to the back exit of the locker room, which led outside. I feared that the sub would be waiting right by the door for me. As I walked outside into the parking lot, I noticed the teacher's car. The worst part was, he was just sitting there, staring at me through the window. I got on the bus and was happy I wasn't the last one to board.